Hi, I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast.
How are you, Katina? What are you telling us about today?
I'm doing good, and today we are going to talk about ostracism, or being left out at work, and how that impacts your work-family life, basically, how that impacts your work-family interface.
Interesting. It sounds really interesting because as we know, with everything we've talked about with work-family conflict and stress, and how stress ties into your, how you feel at work can bleed into your life and vice versa. So I'm guessing there's some of that happening maybe?
Yes, exactly. So the experience of being ignored or being excluded at work is pretty damaging, and it ends up impacting the way that you feel, and then you pass those feelings along to people at home. So it's a little bit straightforward, but also not a topic that we've talked about before. We haven't really talked about ostracism before. So I think that this will be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear the results and hear about the study.
Yes, I'm excited to tell you about it. In the meantime, how is your life?
Life is good. We're fully settled into our new apartment, which I feel like I've talked about that a few times on the show, but we're like really, really settled, meaning everything is unpacked. We only have like a couple minor things, like mostly just hanging stuff up on walls, like deciding where all of our art is going to go. But I feel like we're always very slow about making those decisions. So it doesn't feel like I don't know. I don't feel like bad about it. So it's fun. It's kind of been nice to be here and to have my own office. I really like having my own office. And I know I've said that before, but I really like it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is really nice to have your own space and to be able to like really focus and not have to be thinking about, what someone else is doing in the house, or just like be distracted if you're like in the zone. I know you had mentioned like it's a little bit hard sometimes to make yourself stop paying attention, which is a little bit different. But on the flip side, your ability to focus gets a lot better when you have your own space, I feel.
Yes, it is a lot better. And then like right now with recording, like I feel like when I would record at the last apartment, I would be sitting in basically the shared space, and Danny would have to be like silently tiptoeing around.
Right.
But now I get to just be here, and he can do whatever he wants, and he's not going to be intruding or making, obviously you can't like play the drums or something crazy. Luckily we don't have any drums, but that would obviously be heard, but normal activities, you can't really hear it in this room. So it's really nice.
Yeah. Hopefully Danny won't get any drums. Can you imagine if he's like, now that we have all this space?
Ugh. He actually has a drum set in storage.
He does?
Yeah.
When did
I
he
never
play
want
drums?
to see that drum set again in high school. And
that's funny.
Yeah, I don't know. He got them when he was relatively young. Maybe he was middle school. Yeah. And he like really wants to one day, when you have like a big house, dreams, where he wants to have like turn like a third garage or some sort of like type room into a soundproof room. And he was like, you could record in there and I could play the drums in there. And I was like, it has to really be soundproof in order for me to be okay with these drums.
Yeah. That would be necessary, I think. Also just like with a neighbor situation, there has to be, if someone moved in near me and they had drums, I would like probably be like, excuse me, but no.
Yeah, I know. It's really annoying. Danny's dad plays the drums too. And at their old house, when they lived in California still, they had a soundproof garage. And so he would play in there. And like, generally speaking, it was soundproof from, the outside. Like if you're outside, you would not hear it. You wouldn't know. The neighbors would never know. But they didn't soundproof the ceiling. So Danny's room was right upstairs, right above it, like his childhood room. And so you could hear the drums in his room because there was no soundproofing on the ceiling. So that was a big miss. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I just never knew this fact about Daniel.
Yeah. Drums. Yeah. But anyway, so besides the
Were you
drumming
like
potential.
Were you like, my boyfriend's a drummer?
No, he wasn't like he wasn't advertising his drumming. He was more into the sports, generally speaking. He would not.
He didn't wear it around his neck and pedal around the neighborhood drumming for all to hear.
He didn't have like his, drumsticks with him, like being all, I don't know what you would do to advertise your drumming, but he wasn't like in a band or anything like that. He just did it.
He's a
for
secret
fun.
drummer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hilarious. I
Yep.
love it. I love it.
Well, it was your birthday. I know this is not going to
know.
air until like well after your birthday, but yay, happy birthday.
know. It was my birthday. Thank you. And the gift that you sent me was the cutest thing ever. It was so cute. It was a candle with a bee on it and a wine glass that said Queen Bee. It was so cute.
The wine glass is so cute.
I loved it.
Really think
I'm
looks
going to
fun.
have some wine in it on my birthday. On this weekend, sorry.
When you're celebrating.
When I'm celebrating. On my actual birthday, I had to work like a really long day, so I was just like blah, I didn't do anything. But this weekend I will have more time to celebrate, so that will be what I will do. Yes. I'm very happy about it because I need a little time to relax Reno.
And it's kind of a, well, I wouldn't say a big birthday, but sort of.
It is. I know, 35. It feels weird. And I was born in a crazy snowstorm.
Oh.
And so all of like my parents' friends and stuff have been texting or like sending me messages on social media being like, I remember the day you were born. It was the worst snowstorm of anyone's life. And so it really makes me feel old because they're like 35 years ago, it was like one of the worst snowstorms Philadelphia's ever seen. And you made your way into the world. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of crazy. Like I feel so old thinking about like 35. It just sounds like, I don't know. It sounds like an old timey story of like, we had to wear snowshoes and get to the, I don't, it just sounds that
to
way.
get to the hospital.
Yeah.
Our carriage wouldn't work. So
yes, it just sounds that way to me. So it's like funny. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, it just sounds like a story of like hardship and like back in the day when you were born in the midst of this snowstorm. So I've been feeling kind of old about that.
That's funny. Yeah, well, 35 is, I mean,
Yes.
it's not old, but it's definitely like securely in the adult arena.
I am securely adult at this point.
Yeah.
I don't feel anyone would describe me as an insecure adult. Although I was at the gym the other day and this guy was like, I mean, he was like a lot older than me, so like maybe that's what it is, but this was like 3 days ago. He was talking about his wife or something. And then he was like, well, you wouldn't know. You're probably not married. And I was like, no, I am married. And he was like, you're married? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, how old are you? And I was like, I'm old enough to be married. Like, like that's a real like bad guess. You know what I mean? Like, like that's real young. Like I'm at least old enough to be married, dude. I was like, this is very confusing to me. But I think he was just like, I don't know what, maybe I looked particularly youthful on that day, but I was like, well, on one hand I feel quite old about myself, but on the other hand someone thinks I'm like 19 years old apparently, so that's wonderful.
I think you're, I don't know how old this person was, but I feel like when you're more on the extremes, like if you're you know, much older or much younger, then you always think the person is on the other extreme.
Like little kids think people are like so old, and people who are like more advanced in their years think people that aren't that young are so young. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I just feel like, you know, I remember when I was, I mean, probably even in high school, I was like 15 and I remember there was like something we were writing like our life goals or something crazy, and I put something about being married at 23, and now looking at that it makes me laugh so much because I was like at 23 I was just like barely in grad school, like I mean you're like, nope. I know people do get married at that age and that's fine, but like for me and what I ended up wanting to do, it just made no sense.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I also think it's funny how like, you know, when you think back to what those ages sounded like when you were that age, like I remember my cousin when she was like in a junior in high school or something, her and her friends were talking about their prom, and one of their teachers that came to the prom, and they were, you know, like teachers come to the prom and they like dress like in gowns or whatever, like the teachers dress up, and they were talking about this one teacher and they were like, oh my God, like Mrs. So-and-so looks amazing. And they were like, yeah, I think she's like 32. And it just made me laugh that they would be like, wow, like she's like not a frump at all. And how old she is. It's crazy. Like it just always stands out to me because I remember I heard them say that and I was like, oh my God, that's the funniest thing. So that's definitely true. But anyway, I'm excited for this year because I do think that every year has gotten better and better over time. Like I don't have any like regrets about the direction things are moving, and I feel like there's so many exciting things on the horizon. And I feel like the good news about 35, even though like you're a little bit like closer to 40 and that like freaks a lot of people out, is that like I do feel really like I was starting to think about it and I was like, you know what, we graduated from grad school like a while ago. I got my master's degree over a decade ago. So then you start to be like, you know what, I've been doing this stuff for a long time and I like know a lot of stuff and I feel confident in myself, and like that I think is really valuable.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like, while it doesn't feel like I've been working for 10 years, right?
No.
It doesn't feel like that, but at the same time I have been. And when I talk to people that are starting out or newer into the career space or students, I realize, wow, like, yeah, I have 10 years of experience, but I also have experience and I have like a lot of knowledge that I've gained from it. And
yeah,
it makes the workplace more interesting in some ways.
Yeah, I think
Still
so. So I feel like
but
you get like more confident in yourself and your abilities, and it allows you to like open up new possibilities and opportunities. And I'm excited for everything that's to come for us. I'm excited for everything that's to come for the year. So even though 35 is a number that freaks me out a little bit, I feel like I'm also just like, I wouldn't want to be 30 again, or I wouldn't want to be like 25 again. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm happy to be in the place that I'm in. I feel good about it.
Yeah, good. Yay. Well,
Yes.
happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I feel like we've tangented for quite some time, so let's
We
go
have.
back to ostracism.
Yeah. So, speaking of feeling good about yourself, let's talk about feeling terrible about yourself. No, but really, that's what we're talking about. So the article is called "The Cost of Being Ignored: Emotional Exhaustion in the Work and Family Domains," and it's by Thompson, Carlson, Kakmar, and Vogel. And it just came out hot off the presses in the Journal of Applied Psychology in 2020.
Spicy, nice and fresh. Okay.
Yes, nice and fresh and spicy.
Spicy.
Give me the spicy ostracism. Okay, that was like half Italian, half Count Dracula. Anyway.
I think it should be full Count Dracula next time, but
I'll try my best.
Okay.
So what is ostracism? Ostracism, very simply, is the experience of being ignored or excluded by those with whom one comes into contact with at work. And while it might seem like being ostracized at work should be no big deal, like, you know, they're just your coworkers, they're not, it's not like you're being completely shunned in all areas of your life. It becomes very confusing to people when they're being ostracized, because unlike things like discrimination or more direct forms of exclusion, ostracism is just kind of confusing to people. So people aren't sure why they're being left out. They don't know why they're being ignored. And when people feel like things are fuzzy, they work really hard to try to understand why. And so ostracism is one of those things that takes up a lot of like energy, because you're trying to figure out like, what is this stemming from? And it's really hard to figure out, because it's not like someone's directly saying, I don't like you, or you're experiencing something that's more direct. It's more of this like indirect thing that causes you to feel pain, but it's something that takes up a lot of mental energy because you're just not sure why. So ostracism is kind of distracting in that way.
So is this like, when you're saying it's not as direct, it's just more of the, this whole group went to lunch and never asked me, or they went to happy hour and didn't ask me?
Exactly. Or like everybody's having a conversation about something that I don't know about. And so they're like kind of talking around me, but not including me. Mm-hmm. That's another example. Or, people seem to have like help each other with things or have like networks, and I don't feel part of that network. So I'm just kind of left out, but I don't really understand why that's the case. Mm-hmm. So, and ostracism can happen either like one time or it can be ongoing. But even being ostracized for small periods of time, people find negative because it makes them feel like they're worth less within, not necessarily worthless, but they are worth less, or they're less worthy than their other colleagues that are not being ostracized.
Interesting. Okay. Do you, I don't know anything about the study yet, but because one of my first questions is, I kind of anticipate that some of those things, like the conversation piece, might have to do with how long you've been on a team or how long you've known certain people. So you can imagine if I'm in a workplace and everybody's known each other for a really long time, whether, at that job, or maybe they came from other jobs, they knew each other, or from school or something, and they're having those conversations, that's like very easy to get into that place of feeling left out because they probably know some of the same people, they've got some of the same experiences that you weren't a part of, and so those conversations that you were talking about probably happen a lot more often in those types of situations.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, it doesn't have to be intentional that people are being left out. So it could just be something simple like that. Like people around them are not recognizing the fact that they're leaving someone out. And so it doesn't have to be like an active mean act, but that's why it's more confusing to people because they can't figure out, like, is it just that they know each other better and so it's not that they don't like me, or is it that they actively don't like me and even if they didn't know each other better they'd still leave me out, so it gets a little bit confusing. I think the more you can rationalize it, so it might actually help to be like, oh, well, you know what? They probably just know each other from before. It's not something about me. It's just something about the circumstance. Is probably easier to justify to yourself than something where there's not a clear reason why. That probably, I think the research or the theory around ostracism would suggest that would be even more harmful because it would affect your feelings of self-worth. Like I can't rationalize it in any other way except for to say that they probably just don't like me as much.
Right. So if it's, a established team that everyone has been there for a little while or something like that, where you can't explain it away.
Yes,
makes sense.
Exactly. Yes. And so basically when people feel left out, it has these negative consequences, and it has both emotional consequences and cognitive consequences. So it hurts your feelings and it hurts your brain. It makes your brain feel more overloaded, partially because you're trying to process all this information, right? So the two things that they're interested in looking at in terms of like negative consequences and what they found happens when you're ostracized is that your positive mood goes down. So emotionally, you feel less positively when you experience ostracism. And you also feel more distressed. So your levels of psychological distress go up. And so feeling positive emotion is something that we've talked about before. And basically the, way to tell if you're feeling positive emotion are things like I'm feeling happy, excited, activated, like I'm in a positive mood. Those are the kinds of items that are in a positive mood type scale. And then being distressed is experiencing some kind of duress or stress, feeling very dissatisfied or upset about a situation that's going on currently in your workplace. So those are the two things that are impacted in this study. There could be other things that are impacted by being ostracized. But in this study, what they found is that your positive mood goes down and your psychological distress goes up.
So that's interesting. So it's not just the absence of positive emotion, but a presence of something negative.
Yes, exactly.
So it's both.
Yes, and it's both like cognitively problematic because stress is more of a cognition, and it's also emotionally. So you have like less positive emotions and your brain is in a state of stress during this time period.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds terrible.
Yes.
That's not good.
Yes, it's not good. And so the interesting thing, so that in and of itself would be interesting to say, okay, ostracism is something that causes people to experience these negative outcomes. But what this study looked at was, what is then the impact of those negative outcomes on your home life? So what they did was they actually asked people's spouses to report the extent to which they felt that the person, as a result of these feelings of like lowered positive mood and higher psychological distress, were more likely to undermine their family, which means like they take out their work frustrations on their family members. and the extent to which their spouse feels emotionally drained from dealing with that family member, and feeling like kind of burned out from the demands of having to deal with that family member. So that's kind of the more interesting part, is not necessarily just what it does to the target, but also when people feel ostracized at work, they're looking at what does that do to their family.
And what do they find?
So they found that when individuals are experiencing higher levels of psychological distress as a result of ostracism, that impacts the extent to which their family members feel exhausted with them, and impacts the extent to which people say that they're undermining. So both psychological distress was related to both emotional exhaustion and family undermining as an outcome related to ostracism. So this is what's happening. So when you feel ostracized, it is the case that your family is more likely to feel exhausted with you, and they're more likely to perceive you as trying to like pick fights or do things to disrupt the family dynamic.
It makes a lot of sense. So you're in a bad mood, you're feeling stressed out, and we know, everybody's experienced this, right? Where their spouse, their partner, their children, even when they're in a bad mood, they're going to take it out on the people that they're closest to when they're at home. It happens all the time. So you come home, you've been ostracized, and then now you're like a little short with your family members, or you're frustrated easily by them. And then you are going to make those people feel tired and stressed out because you're doing that to them as well. So they're now having to like manage your negative emotion and your negative moods to then try to deal with that at home. And that's not, that sucks. That's not fair to them. Not their fault, but that tends to happen. That's unfortunate.
Yeah. So basically what the article demonstrates is that there are these pathways through emotion and through distress that make you more likely to, basically take that out on your family. And then your family is more likely to recognize that and actually rate you as being higher on those things. So the thing that I think is particularly interesting about this is that a lot of times I think we think that interpersonal relationships or things that go on at work are just limited to you and your personal work relationships. And we might not recognize as individuals the extent to which people are actually impacted by our experiences in our own work day. So, I would be curious to know whether the people that were being rated as undermining their family and exhausting their family members were aware of in the moment that that's what they were doing. So I think it's interesting to think about, like, if you're experiencing these negative consequences at work because you're feeling left out, what are you doing in terms of bringing that home to your family? But even more interestingly, if you work in an organization where there's a culture of ostracism or it's very cliquey, people feel left out a lot. I hear people in organizations talking about cliques all the time. So if you're in like a very cliquey organization, that it's not just damaging to the employee themselves, but also thinking more broadly about what you're doing to families when that person goes home, and what kind of like responsibility you have as an organization to put better vibes into your community and family members. Like, think about people's kids and spouses, whatever, that it's not just like, oh, I'm in this clique and I'm leaving this person out, but whatever, it's no big deal. We're adults, grow up. It actually does bother people, and it not only bothers them, but it puts these like very icky vibes into their family life as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thought. And if you're somebody that's ostracized others, if that is something to think about. Maybe you don't like somebody and that's why you're leaving them out, but maybe you don't want to impact their children, I would hope. I mean, there's probably some people out there that are awful, but generally speaking, I think you don't want to create this negative environment for all these different people. And even if the person you don't like, majority of people don't want to make them dwell on it and feel bad constantly. You just might not want to hang out with them, which is fair, but thinking about how to not make them feel that way, so that you're not hurting all these other people. Maybe you sucking it up and being nice to somebody and including them is worth it if you know that that's going to help impact their overall wellness and then everybody else's wellness that they're living with too.
Yeah. And I think that something that is also interesting is that positive mood had less of an impact on outcome variables as reported by the spouse than did psychological distress. So psychological distress was related to both spouses' reports of family undermining and emotional exhaustion, whereas positive mood was only related to family undermining. So I think it's also important to recognize that that the role of psychological distress is a little bit stronger, because we know a lot of interventions that you can do to make yourself less stressed. So if you're experiencing ostracism, I think it can be hard to like admit to yourself that you're feeling upset about something like that, because it does feel kind of like kids on a schoolyard, right? Like, I'm being left out, and so I'm upset. And I think there is a sense of, you know, and I've heard students and other folks talk about this before, like if you're dealing with these interpersonal dynamics, you kind of just feel like, well, you know what, like I'm an adult, I don't need everyone to like me, these are just my colleagues, this is just my, you know, work environment, like I don't need this to affect me. But the reality is that it does take up cognitive and emotional energy. And then if you're feeling that psychological distress, you're like depleted from resources. So when you come home, your brain is kind of caught up in that psychological distress, and smaller things in the family life can trip you up and make you like snap at people, or, you know, call people out, or just be generally grouchy towards people, which then leads your family to be like, man, like I'm kind of sick of dealing with you. Right. So if you ignore the fact that you're stressed by it or act like it's not happening, it doesn't make the stress go away. So if you're in a situation like that, you might not be able to solve the problem of the ostracism itself, but thinking about how like techniques to de-stress could actually help solve some of these issues more fully.
That's a really good point, because I think we always want to say, oh, it doesn't matter that someone doesn't like us. And yet even if we don't dwell on it in a very active way, something is gnawing at you, right? I think there's some people that are better at letting go of that than others. And maybe those people are able to see less distress from that situation. But, you know, we've talked a lot about different strategies to recover from work, to fill up your cup. And it seems like this is the right place to do it too. So if you're dealing with that, make sure you fill up that cup before you go and shatter the glass of your empty cup on your family.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a good point. You know, a lot of times it sounds silly to be like, I'm sad because I'm being left out. But if you think about the experience of being left out, if you've ever been left out of something before, it does have an impact. The research shows that it has an impact. But I think, you know, an exercise that I do with MBA students a lot is to ask them about a time that they felt included and a time that they felt excluded. And people really remember times that they felt excluded from a group for years. Like, something that I'm always fascinated by is that the students are able to remember times that they felt excluded from when they were like 8, 14, you know, 20 something, and maybe now in their current work situation, they can think of times, but they really do stand out for people when you feel excluded from a group. And if it's taking up so much energy that you can recall it so vividly and like relive those emotions and the stress that you had, like addressing it in the moment seems appropriate, right? Because these are things that kind of stick with people for a long time. Similarly, feeling included also tends to stick with people for a long time. So if someone's been excluded, for example, for a while, and then someone comes in and shows, you know, that they want to befriend that person or they want to stand up for that person or whatever the case may be, that matters a lot too. But I think it's just more of an issue of like adults have trouble honoring the fact that they care whether or not they fit in, particularly in a work context, because it doesn't seem like that should matter. Like, I think a lot of people just take the attitude of like, work is work and I'm not here to make friends and whatever. But even if that is your attitude that you're saying to yourself, it's okay to admit to yourself that that's not actually how you feel, because being left out does have consequences for the self. And that's the same at work as it is in any other domain. So I think it's important also to like give yourself permission to recognize that that's not silly and to say, okay, I am upset about being excluded in this context. I'm going to have to deal with this stress, because if I don't, it's going to spill over into my family life. And then it might make people who generally do like me less, because I'm starting to bring home these negative emotions and this stress without dealing with them appropriately.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I don't know. I think that I'm hoping that the conversation around some of this is changing, since people are focusing on workplace wellness, right? Like, we're able to build worker being because that's a thing that people are talking about more in this generation and this present workforce. So I'm hoping that people see that differently, because I think you're right. And there's like this mindset that a lot of people have, that work is work and, you know, everything else is your life and your relationships that matter. But you spend so much time at work, just like everything we talk about with work environments, right? You spend so much time there. If you have a bad manager, that's a problem. If you're feeling left out, even if you in your head say, I don't care if I'm left out, I'm just here to get my job done, it's going to impact you because it's happening all the time.
Right.
And you're there all the time. So if you see that, if you see those people again, even if you've only been left out a couple times, like you said, it's not just about this continuous thing. It could just be a few times here and there. But like you're in that environment a lot. So it does have an impact. Those relationships do matter. They impact your career. They impact your work. They impact your mood every single day. So pretending as if it doesn't matter is just not realistic. You know, some people, like I said, some people are just better at not caring if people like them or not. But if everybody doesn't like you, or if you're constantly ostracized, you know, it's one thing if you have, okay, well, Joe over there doesn't like me. We don't really like each other. We can have a cordial relationship while we work. That's fine. But if Joe and everybody else goes out to lunch every week and I'm never included, that's no longer fine. So I think that there's a difference between handling not liking somebody and being constantly left out of things.
Yeah, and I think that we've talked about relationships a decent amount in our work here, but I also think it's important to recognize, you mentioned like, you know, people are becoming more aware of wellness and thinking about this, but I think a lot of times when people think of wellness, they don't think of things related to interpersonal relationships. So they wouldn't necessarily put like clickiness or leaving people out or excluding people under the wellness umbrella, because they're not thinking about it as a stressful experience. They're more thinking of it as like, oh, we want people to feel like they fit in, or we don't want somebody to leave because they have a bad conflict. But they're not thinking about like what's in between that bad conflict or that feeling left out and someone leaving is all this other stuff. Like they're in a, you know, less positive mood. They're more distressed. They're bringing this home. Probably their families are saying to them, like, maybe you should think about getting a new job, or, you know, it doesn't seem like you're very happy here. You know, there's a lot of different things that are going on that's in between. Like, oh, we want this person to feel like they fit in so that they don't turn over. And they're putting that probably in like the engagement realm, or even like in a performance metric realm, or thinking about it as something to address like in a performance appraisal meeting if they feel like that's the person that's being cliquey. But they're not thinking about relationships and relationship building as being like part of the wellness spectrum. And so I think that that's also an interesting point to bring forward, is like, these things actually do matter for people's well-being. And if you have bad relationships at work, you can have like all the yoga at lunch you want, but you're not like, you know, solving the primary problem that people's relationships are not positive, or people are feeling like they don't fit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it all comes down to what we've talked about all the time. And I think you're totally right that I'm putting it in the wellness bucket because of who we are and what we study, what we talk about. But you're right. I think most people don't. Just like we always talk about job control or work autonomy, right? Being able to have some control over your life, your flexibility in your job, to go to a doctor's appointment in the middle of the day, or not have someone breathing down your neck around exactly which tasks have to be done at the exact same time every day, or something like that. Like having flexibility in control of your job really, really, really has a big impact on wellness. And I think you're totally right that nobody thinks about that, and nobody thinks about relationships. You're right. I kind of made that leap, but I think it's almost taking a step back and realizing that the environment that you're in at work is huge and is very critical for wellness. And that includes the people you're working with, the relationships you're building, the type of work you're doing. That's what matters at the core. And then adding in things like yoga and, you know, maybe benefits around gym memberships or meditations or whatever. Those things are great additional things. But without that baseline work environment where you can have positive relationships, you can manage your time your own way, you can leave your job and disconnect it in the evening, like all those things are way more important right off the bat than the additional, like more fun wellness stuff that you hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like it's, you know, this common like primary or root cause like primary or root solution versus like a secondary solution. Like, a primary cause of stress that people need to deal with through things like yoga or mindfulness, etc., could be things like bad relationships at work, people acting cliquey, feeling left out, etc. So you can either give people ways to deal with that, or you can say, well, let's address the problem at the root. And I think a lot of times people are unwilling to address issues like that because it seems like, well, they should be able to figure it out on their own. Everyone's an adult, etc. But it doesn't get any easier to figure out interpersonal relationships or how to handle them in the workplace because there's so much tied to them as well. Like you have financial things tied to them. There's a lot of other risks involved than just like approaching a friend or a person in your neighborhood that you feel left out by or something like that. So I don't think people know the way to go about it. And so managers, if you have teams that are, cliquey in this way or leaving people out, or you notice that one person's always left out, you could be the person to rope them in, invite them, or bring it up with other people that person feels left out, or seems like they're being left out. Make sure that they're being included. Like little things like that could help and make a big impact for your employee and also for the families of that employee. And if you are one of the people that's leaving people out, you need to think really hard about what your impact is on, the folks who work for you and the people who are surrounding and care about the people who work for you, because your reach is bigger than you might realize when you're perpetrating these behaviors.
I agree. I think it's a lot about awareness and addressing the issues. And then I think from an organizational leadership perspective, there's, some policies you can enact. I mean, I think we always talk about like non-discrimination policies and, not harassing people and things like that. But this is a little bit more subtle than all of that. You're not going to have a don't leave people out policy, but well, maybe you can, right? People don't have those types of policies, but maybe you can create some sort of anti-ostracism policy to make sure people are being welcoming and including others and beyond diversity and inclusion, because that's obviously a different type of inclusive environment. But I think it's kind of related. So just trying to be as inclusive as possible in every aspect, regardless of why you're doing it. You just want to, have a warm, welcoming work environment for everybody that's involved.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I hope that everyone listening, if you've been excluded, try to think about ways that you can either change around that situation or recognize and cope with the stress that you're likely experiencing as a result of that situation. And if you're in position of power, really thinking hard about how to create a more inclusive environment so that people are not feeling this way and bringing it home to negatively impact their families and communities.
I agree. I love it. We'd love to hear from all of you listeners as well. We'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts on this topic. You can reach out to us. We have a new email address. Our workerbeing@gmail.com email will still work, so don't be scared if you've been using that one. But you can also email us now at contact@workerbeing.com. So we're fancy now. We have workerbeing.com as the end of our email now. So please reach out to us that way. Contact@workerbeing.com. You can find us on social media as well at workerbeing on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find us on our website, workerbeing.com. And we'd love to hear your stories. I'd love to hear from you. And I also want to do a final little plug. We've talked about our events before. We had a really great event a couple weeks ago that we had so much fun at, and we would love to include all of you in the future. So if you want to hear more about our events, please sign up for our email list. We have a retreat coming up in April. If you remember, it's going to be amazing. We have some really fun sponsors for our swag bag, which we'll be announcing soon on social media. So you'll get lots of really cool goodies as well as great content to build a sustainable career. So check that out on our website, and also, again, email list. And then we recently rehabilitated our Facebook group, the Worker Being Hive. So if you'd like to get in on the conversation on workplace wellness with other like-minded folks, go ahead and join that. All right, enough plugs. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
The Worker Being Podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabara
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.